Hong Kong, 1967. The city hums with the particular electricity of a place that believes in spectacle. Outside a large television broadcast building, Bruce Lee arrives on foot, unhurried, plain, carrying nothing. The studio entrance opens before Bruce Lee without announcement. Bruce Lee walks through it the way Bruce Lee walks through everything, quietly, completely, belonging to no performance yet. Inside the studio entrance, host Victor Lam waits with both hands extended and a wide, genuine smile. Victor Lam has hosted 50 guests on this program. Victor Lam has never hosted anyone quite like Bruce Lee, though Victor Lam does not know this yet. Bruce Lee shakes Victor Lam's hand with warmth, equal, unhurried, present. Two men meeting before a camera changes everything between them. Victor Lam leads Bruce Lee through the studio's inner corridor toward the broadcast stage, gesturing at the set, the audience risers, the camera positions, explaining the evening's format with the enthusiasm of someone proud of what Victor Lam has built. Bruce Lee listens carefully, nodding at the right moments, asking one quiet question about the audience size. Bruce Lee is already reading the room before entering it. In the backstage holding area, separated from the studio floor by a heavy curtain, Bull Camo sits in a reinforced chair with both massive arms crossed over a gray sleeveless shirt. Bull Camo's shaved head reflects the backstage work lights. Bull Camo's thick scarred hands rest on Bull Camo's own forearms like weapons placed temporarily on a shelf. Bull Camo waits with the patience of someone certain of the outcome. Bull Camo hears Bruce Lee's voice from the other side of the curtain and leans forward in the reinforced chair. Bull Camo parts the curtain edge with one thick finger and peers through the gap at Bruce Lee speaking with Victor Lam on the studio stage. Bull Camo's eyes travel Bruce Lee's lean frame, the plain shirt, the slim build, the quiet manner. Bull Camo's lip pulls sideways into a slow sneer. Bruce Lee settles into the guest chair opposite Victor Lam's desk, adjusting once, then becoming completely still. The studio chair fits Bruce Lee the way everything fits Bruce Lee, not by conforming to Bruce Lee, but by Bruce Lee finding the natural position within it. Bruce Lee looks at the empty audience seats, the cameras, the lights. Bruce Lee breathes once. Bruce Lee is ready for whatever this evening contains. The studio audience files in through the side doors, men and women in formal 1960s attire, hair set, jackets pressed, the particular dressed-up energy of people attending something they consider an event worth dressing for. The risers fill row by row. The buzz of pre-broadcast audience conversation rises and spreads through the studio like warmth. Victor Lam's program is popular. Tonight's audience has no idea how memorable tonight will become. Backstage, Bull Camo rises from the reinforced chair, a slow process that involves the entire room shifting its energy around the movement of so much mass. Bull Camo stands at full height and cracks each knuckle one by one, the sounds arriving like small detonations in the quiet backstage space. A nearby crew member glances at Bull Camo. Bull Camo grins at the crew member without warmth. The crew member looks away. At the host's desk, Victor Lam arranges the evening's note cards with practiced hands. The questions prepared, the segments timed, the broadcast format memorized. Victor Lam has reviewed tonight's rundown 3 times. Tonight's rundown does not include Bull Camo. Tonight's rundown does not include anything that is about to happen on this stage in front of this audience and these rolling cameras. Victor Lam reviews the rundown one final time. Storyboard 2, live cameras rolling. The broadcast begins. Studio lights rise to full intensity, flooding the stage with the particular flat, brilliant light of 1960s television that makes everything visible and nothing hideable. Victor Lam opens the program with the polished ease of someone who has done this 100 times, greeting the studio audience with a broad smile, introducing the evening's guest. Victor Lam speaks Bruce Lee's name into the microphone. The cameras begin recording. Opposite Victor Lam in the guest chair with the same natural composure Bruce Lee carries everywhere. The cameras do not alter Bruce Lee. The studio lights do not alter Bruce Lee. The live audience watching from the risers does not alter Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee speaks with Victor Lam the way Bruce Lee speaks with anyone, directly, warmly, without performance, without the particular self-consciousness that cameras produce in most people. Victor Lam leans forward across the desk with genuine curiosity, asking Bruce Lee about Kung Fu, about the philosophy behind the practice, about what separates real martial arts from what most people imagine martial arts to be. Bruce Lee listens to each question fully before answering. Bruce Lee's answers are precise and unhurried. The studio audience leans forward in the risers, drawn in by something in Bruce Lee's voice they cannot name. Victor Lam asks Bruce Lee to demonstrate hand speed for the studio audience. Bruce Lee agrees with a small nod and rises from the guest chair. Bruce Lee moves to the open stage area and asks Victor Lam to hold a pencil vertically. Bruce Lee's hand moves, the strike and retraction completed before the audience's eyes can track either movement. The pencil is untouched. The air where Bruce Lee's hand moved still hums. The studio audience erupts forward in their seats, a collective lean, a collective intake of breath, the physical response of hundreds of people witnessing something their eyes registered but their minds have not yet processed. Victor Lam stares at the pencil in Victor Lam's own hand. Victor Lam looks at Bruce Lee. Victor Lam looks at the pencil again. The audience begins murmuring neighbor to neighbor, row to row, spreading backward through the risers. Victor Lam laughs, a genuine, delighted, slightly disbelieving laugh that the microphone catches and broadcasts to every television set receiving this signal across Hong Kong tonight. Victor Lam holds the pencil up for the audience to see, unmarked, unbroken. Victor Lam asks Bruce Lee to explain what just happened. Bruce Lee smiles slightly and begins explaining. The audience settles to hear Bruce Lee speak. Nobody is watching the backstage curtain. Behind the backstage curtain, Bull Kamo stands before a small monitor showing the live broadcast feed. Bull Kamo watches Bruce Lee demonstrate hand speed on the monitor. Bull Kamo watches the audience's reaction. Bull Kamo watches Victor Lam's delighted response. Bull Kamo's jaw tightens. The tightening begins at the corners and moves inward. Bull Kamo's thick arms uncross slowly. Bull Kamo stares at the monitor with the particular displeasure of someone whose narrative is being interrupted. Bull Kamo turns from the backstage monitor and rises to full standing height, the movement filling the backstage space with displaced air and the particular gravity of 400 pounds deciding to move with purpose. Bull Kamo does not tell the backstage crew where Bull Kamo is going. Bull Kamo does not ask permission from the stage manager standing nearby. Bull Kamo simply begins walking toward the curtain that separates backstage from the live broadcast stage. The stage crew member nearest the curtain sees Bull Kamo moving and steps forward, beginning a sentence about the broadcast schedule, about the segment timing, about the guest appearance order. Bull Kamo looks at the stage crew member the way Bull Kamo looks at furniture that has moved into Bull Kamo's path. The stage crew member stops the sentence. Bull Kamo reaches the curtain. Bull Kamo parts it with one massive hand and steps through. Storyboard 3, the giant appears. Bull Kamo steps through the stage curtain and onto the live broadcast stage. 400 pounds of uninvited mass arriving under the full studio lights with the cameras rolling and Hong Kong watching. The stage floor registers Bull Kamo's footsteps as audible impacts. Bull Kamo's gray sleeveless shirt strains across the enormous shoulders. Bull Kamo's shaved head catches the studio light. Bull Kamo's entrance takes 3 seconds. The studio atmosphere takes those 3 seconds to shatter. The studio audience sees Bull Kamo first, a wave of gasps beginning at the front rows and traveling backward through the risers like a stone dropped in still water. Audience members grip their neighbors' arms. People in the back rows stand to see what the front rows are reacting to. The gasping reaches the back wall and comes back as murmuring. The studio's pre-broadcast warmth evaporates instantly, replaced by something colder and more uncertain. Victor Lam rises from the host's desk, the practiced smoothness of Victor Lam's broadcast manner fracturing visibly as Victor Lam registers Bull Kamo's presence on the live stage. Victor Lam reaches for the desk microphone with one hand and holds the other hand outward toward Bull Kamo in the universal gesture of wait, stop. This is not scheduled. Bull Kamo does not acknowledge Victor Lam's gesture. Bull Kamo continues walking toward stage center. Bull Kamo reaches stage center and stops, planting both feet wide, spreading both arms outward, filling as much of the visible stage as the enormous frame can fill. Bull Kamo looks at the studio audience with the wide grin of someone who has calculated this entrance carefully and believes it is working exactly as planned. Bull Kamo's grin carries the particular confidence of someone who has never been wrong about a room before. Bruce Lee turns in the guest chair as Bull Kamo reaches stage center. Bruce Lee looks at Bull Kamo completely, the full height, the full width, the shaved head, the scarred hands, the gray shirt, the grin. Bruce Lee's expression does not change, does not widen with alarm, does not narrow with anger. Bruce Lee simply sees Bull Kamo the way Bruce Lee sees everything, fully, without distortion, without the interference of fear. Bull Kamo addresses the studio audience directly, projecting the large voice to fill the studio without a microphone, the voice of someone accustomed to being heard without assistance. Bull Kamo introduces Bull Kamo to the audience with theatrical confidence, name, weight, record, reputation. Bull Kamo speaks about Bull Kamo the way someone reads from a scroll of achievements. The audience listens in uncertain silence. Nobody has invited this. Nobody knows how to stop it. Bull Kamo turns from the audience to Bruce Lee and raises one thick arm, extending the finger toward Bruce Lee's seated position with the slow theatrical deliberateness of a man building to something. Bull Kamo tells the audience that Bruce Lee's movies are very entertaining. Bull Kamo tells the audience that entertainers and fighters are very different categories of person. Bull Kamo looks at Bruce Lee while saying this. Bull Kamo is not speaking to the audience anymore. The studio audience responds to Bull Kamo's pointed mockery with the uncomfortable fractured sound of people who do not know whether to laugh or object, some nervous laughter, some silence, some murmuring between neighbors. The audience is caught between the performance instinct to respond to what is clearly designed as comedy and the instinct that something genuine and dangerous has entered the room. The cameras continue rolling. The red lights continue glowing. Everything is being recorded. Bruce Lee rises from the guest chair, not in reaction to Bull Kamo's pointed finger, not in response to the audience's murmuring, not in performance for the cameras. Bruce Lee rises because Bruce Lee has read this situation completely, and standing is the appropriate response to what has arrived on this stage. Bruce Lee stands at full height in the studio lights. The size difference between Bruce Lee and Bull Kamo is total and immediately visible to every person in the room. Storyboard 4, Mockery ON Live TV. Bull Kamo looks at Bruce Lee standing and performs exaggerated surprise for the studio audience, stepping back dramatically, raising both massive hands in mock alarm, telling the audience that Bruce Lee has stood up and now Bull Kamo is frightened. The audience's uncomfortable laughter grows slightly at the theatrics. Bull Kamo feeds on the sound. Bull Kamo gestures at Bruce Lee's lean frame with both open hands, presenting Bruce Lee to the audience like an exhibit. Bull Kamo tells the studio audience that Bruce Lee looks like someone's younger brother who wandered onto the wrong stage. Bull Kamo says this with the broad smile of someone sharing an observation everyone in the room is secretly thinking. Bull Kamo says it loudly, clearly, into the open studio air where the microphones can catch it and the cameras can frame it. Bruce Lee listens to every word. Bruce Lee's expression does not shift by a fraction. The studio audience sits in visible discomfort. The laughter that Bull Kamo's words produce is the specific laughter that people use when they are frightened, and laughter feels safer than silence. The cameras continue rolling. The red recording lights continue glowing above each lens. Every uncomfortable laugh, every nervous murmur, every moment of Bull Kamo's performance is being transmitted live to every television set in Hong Kong receiving this channel tonight. Victor Lam steps around the host's desk and moves toward stage center, raising both hands, voice steady and professional, attempting to redirect the broadcast segment back toward its scheduled format. Bull Kamo looks at Victor Lam approaching and waves one enormous arm sideways, the casual dismissive wave of someone removing an obstacle without giving the obstacle full attention. Victor Lam stops walking. Victor Lam does not step back, but Victor Lam does not step forward either. Bull Kamo turns from Victor Lam to the studio audience and rolls both sleeves of the gray shirt, revealing forearms the size of most people's calves, the muscles dense and layered under scarred skin. Bull Kamo flexes both arms for the audience in a slow, deliberate display, holding the flex, turning left, turning right, presenting every angle. The audience watches in a silence that has moved past uncomfortable into something closer to witness. Bull Kamo grins throughout the entire display. Bruce Lee watches Bull Kamo's display from the standing position beside the guest chair. Bruce Lee's hands are loose at Bruce Lee's sides. Bruce Lee's weight is balanced evenly. Bruce Lee watches Bull Kamo flex and perform and turn for the audience with the focused, neutral attention of someone who stopped being entertained approximately 30 seconds ago and is now engaged in a completely different activity: reading, measuring, mapping what Bull Kamo reveals with every movement. Bull Kamo finishes the display and turns back to Bruce Lee, moving closer, closing the distance between them, bringing the enormous frame into Bruce Lee's immediate space. Bull Kamo leans forward and jabs one thick finger toward Bruce Lee's chest, not touching, stopping inches short, but held there as a sustained invasion. Bull Kamo tells Bruce Lee quietly enough that the audience cannot hear clearly, something that makes two people in the front row exchange alarmed glances. Bruce Lee looks at Bull Kamo's extended finger, then looks up at Bull Kamo's face. Bruce Lee holds Bull Kamo's eyes with the complete, unblinking, unperformed directness that Bruce Lee has maintained since Bull Kamo entered the stage. There is no fear in Bruce Lee's eyes. There is no anger. There is the absolute focused calm of someone who has assessed the situation completely and found nothing in it that requires a change of internal state. Bull Kamo's right hand moves, dropping from the pointed finger position and closing around Bruce Lee's left wrist with the full grip of an enormous hand. Bull Kamo squeezes. The squeeze is not playful. The audience sees it happen, and the studio produces a sharp collective sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a gasp, something between the two that emerges when hundreds of people witness the same alarming thing at precisely the same moment. Storyboard 5. Hands around the throat. Bull Kamo holds Bruce Lee's wrist for 3 seconds, squeezing, watching Bruce Lee's face for the reaction Bull Kamo expects. The reaction Bull Kamo expects does not come. Bruce Lee looks at Bull Kamo's hand on Bruce Lee's wrist with mild curiosity, the way someone looks at weather. Bruce Lee does not pull against the grip, does not wince, does not perform discomfort for the audience. Bull Kamo releases the wrist. Bull Kamo is recalculating. The studio audience has risen halfway from the risers, bodies lifted, hands gripping the seat edges, the collective posture of people who are watching something they feel they should intervene in but do not know how to intervene in. The front row audience members are standing fully. The back rows are straining forward. Every face in the studio audience is directed at the stage. Every face carries the same expression: alarm without outlet. Victor Lam moves from the desk position toward the stage center, speaking into the handheld microphone with controlled urgency, telling the studio audience that the segment is being redirected, that everything is under control. Victor Lam's voice is steady. Victor Lam's face tells a different story. 3 crew members move along the studio perimeter toward the stage. The cameras continue rolling. Nobody has given the cameras a direction to stop rolling. Bull Kamo moves behind Bruce Lee, stepping to Bruce Lee's rear in 2 large steps, the mass of Bull Kamo's body displacing the air around Bruce Lee as Bull Kamo positions. Then both of Bull Kamo's enormous hands rise and close around Bruce Lee's throat from behind, the thick scarred fingers wrapping completely around Bruce Lee's neck, the massive thumbs pressing at the back. The grip closes. Bull Kamo's arms flex. Bull Kamo grins at the audience over Bruce Lee's shoulder. Bull Kamo lifts, a fraction, enough to shift Bruce Lee's weight onto the toes, enough to demonstrate the effortless capability of 400 pounds gripping 140 pounds. Bull Kamo grins at the studio audience over Bruce Lee's shoulder with the grin of someone who has staged this moment completely and is watching it land exactly as planned. Bull Kamo's arms flex visibly under the studio lights. Bull Kamo's hands maintain the grip around Bruce Lee's throat. The studio erupts, not in laughter, not in excitement, but in genuine alarm. Audience members scream. Others grip neighbors' arms with both hands. A woman in the third row covers her mouth and turns away. Children in the audience begin crying. The sound the studio produces is raw and involuntary, the sound of hundreds of people confronting something that exceeds their frame for what this evening was supposed to contain. The studio has changed completely. Victor Lamb grips the edge of the host's desk with both hands, the microphone abandoned on the desk surface, both hands now pressing flat against the desk, as if the desk is the only stable thing in the studio. Victor Lamb's professional composure is completely gone. Victor Lamb's mouth is open. Victor Lamb is watching Bull Kamo's hands around Bruce Lee's throat on live television, and Victor Lamb has no protocol for this moment anywhere in Victor Lamb's prepared notes. The television cameras continue recording. Every red recording light above every lens glows steadily, capturing Bull Kamo's hands around Bruce Lee's throat, capturing the studio audience's alarm, capturing Victor Lamb's frozen expression at the desk edge, capturing everything in the flat, brilliant detail of live 1960s broadcast. Somewhere across Hong Kong, in every home receiving this channel tonight, people are watching their television screens with the same expression the studio audience wears. Nobody changes the channel. Inside Bull Kamo's grip, Bruce Lee's eyes shift. The shift is small, a fraction of focus adjustment, a narrowing that is not anger and is not fear and is not the response of someone being choked. The shift is the specific internal change of someone who has been waiting to understand the full scope of the situation and has now understood it completely. Bruce Lee's hands rise slowly toward Bull Kamo's grip. Bruce Lee has decided. The 2 seconds begin. Storyboard 6, 2 seconds. Bruce Lee's left hand rises to Bull Kamo's right hand, finding the specific pressure point at the junction of Bull Kamo's thumb and index finger, with the precision of someone who has studied hands as architecture. Bruce Lee does not pull against the grip, does not thrash or twist. Bruce Lee applies targeted pressure to one precise point on Bull Kamo's right hand with the controlled force of a person who understands leverage completely and force barely at all. Bruce Lee's fingers apply the wrist lock, a controlled rotation of Bull Kamo's right wrist that uses Bull Kamo's own grip strength against Bull Kamo's joint structure. The technique is invisible to the studio audience. They see Bruce Lee's hands move against Bull Kamo's hands, but the mechanism is too small and too precise to read from the risers. What the audience can read is the result. Bull Kamo's right hand peels from Bruce Lee's throat. Bull Kamo's right hand comes off Bruce Lee's throat, not released voluntarily, peeled by the joint pressure of Bruce Lee's technique working against Bull Kamo's own structural limits. Bull Kamo's right arm extends involuntarily as the wrist lock forces the joint. Bull Kamo's face changes, the grin replaced by confusion, then discomfort, then the specific expression of someone whose body has done something the mind did not authorize. Bull Kamo's grip is broken on one side. Bruce Lee pivots, a quarter turn within Bull Kamo's remaining left-hand grip, using the pivot's momentum to apply rotational force against Bull Kamo's left wrist simultaneously. The combined technique, right wrist locked, left wrist torqued by the pivot, breaks Bull Kamo's full two-handed throat grip in a single connected motion. The entire break takes less time than the studio audience can process watching it. Bull Kamo's hands come away from Bruce Lee's throat. Bruce Lee steps free. Bull Kamo stumbles sideways, the enormous frame thrown off balance by the sudden absence of the resistance Bull Kamo's grip was braced against. When Bruce Lee broke the grip, Bull Kamo's muscles were still pushing against resistance that no longer existed. Bull Kamo takes 2 large sideways steps, each step a controlled fall arrested just before becoming a fall, before Bull Kamo's balance reasserts itself. Bull Kamo's shoulder catches the edge of Victor Lamb's desk. The desk moves 3 inches. Bruce Lee stands free on the open stage, turned to face Bull Kamo, both hands loose at Bruce Lee's sides, breathing even, expression unchanged from the expression Bruce Lee carried through every moment of this encounter. The distance between Bruce Lee and Bull Kamo is now 3 feet. Bull Kamo is off balance. Bruce Lee is completely, perfectly centered. The studio sees both men simultaneously and understands something it cannot articulate but feels entirely in the body. Bull Kamo looks at Bull Kamo's own hands. Both massive hands held before Bull Kamo, turned over, examined, the specific bewildered examination of someone whose tools have just failed them in a way that has no explanation available. Bull Kamo's hands look exactly as they always look: large, scarred, powerful. Bull Kamo cannot find the answer in the hands. The answer is not in the hands. The answer is standing 3 feet away looking at Bull Kamo calmly. The studio audience silence lasts exactly 1 breath, the breath of collective disbelief held simultaneously by every person in the risers. Then the studio erupts, not the uncomfortable fractured sound from earlier, something total and unanimous, the released sound of hundreds of people who were holding something enormous inside them and have just been given permission to release it. The sound fills the studio from floor to ceiling. The cameras capture every face in the audience. Victor Lamb's mouth opens. Victor Lamb has hosted this program for 4 years. Victor Lamb has prepared for difficult guests, unexpected questions, technical failures, audience disruptions. Victor Lamb has never prepared for this. Victor Lamb stands at the desk edge with both hands still pressed flat on the surface and the mouth open and no words arriving. The microphone sits unused on the desk in front of Victor Lamb. Victor Lamb watches Bruce Lee stand on the stage and finds nothing in Victor Lamb's 4 years that applies. Storyboard 7, The Giant Stumbles. Bull Kamo recovers from the stumble and turns to face Bruce Lee across the studio stage. Bull Kamo's face has moved through confusion and arrived at something hotter. The flush of humiliation converting into aggression in the way Bull Kamo's face has probably converted things for 38 years. Bull Kamo lowers the enormous head. Bull Kamo's feet find their position. Bull Kamo charges Bruce Lee across the studio stage at full committed speed. Bruce Lee reads the charge before Bull Kamo's second step lands. Bruce Lee sidesteps left, not dramatically, not in the wide theatrical leap of movie fighting, but with the minimum necessary movement of someone who understands that efficiency is the only real elegance. Bull Kamo's charge carries Bull Kamo through the space where Bruce Lee stood. Bruce Lee is already 2 feet to the left when Bull Kamo arrives at the original position. Bruce Lee watches Bull Kamo pass. Bull Kamo's charge, finding no resistance, carries the 400-pound frame across the stage and into the set furniture arranged for the broadcast, the side table, the decorative items, the secondary camera positions equipment stand. Bull Kamo crashes through the furniture with the indiscriminate momentum of mass that has run out of direction. The set pieces scatter. The camera equipment stand tips. The crash is enormous and loud and completely visible to every person in the studio. The studio audience erupts standing, every person in every row on their feet simultaneously, the risers trembling slightly from the collective movement. The screaming and shouting from the audience merges into a single, overwhelming sound that pushes against the studio walls. People are pointing at the stage. People are grabbing each other. Children are being lifted by parents. The studio has moved completely outside every boundary the audience arrived with tonight. Nothing about this resembles the program they came to watch. Bruce Lee stands at stage center watching Bull Kamo recover from the crashed furniture, watching Bull Kamo push the scattered set pieces aside, watching the massive frame gather itself from the wreckage. Bruce Lee has not moved from the sidestep position. Bruce Lee stands with both hands loose at both sides, weight balanced, breathing even. Bruce Lee watches Bull Kamo with the same focused patience Bruce Lee has applied to this entire encounter from the first moment Bull Kamo stepped through the curtain. Bull Kamo pushes the overturned furniture aside and rises to full height, face deeply flushed, chest heaving. the controlled performance entirely gone now, replaced by the raw forward-moving energy of someone who has lost the script completely and is operating on something older and less sophisticated. Bull Kamo turns to face Bruce Lee across the studio stage. Bull Kamo's expression contains humiliation, fury, and the desperate need to recover something that cannot be recovered. Victor Lam speaks into the handheld microphone with controlled urgency, addressing the studio audience directly, asking for calm, explaining that the situation is being managed. Victor Lam's voice is professional and steady. Victor Lam's eyes are not professional and steady. Victor Lam's eyes are fixed on the stage between Bruce Lee and Bull Kamo, with the eyes of someone watching something they cannot stop and cannot look away from simultaneously. The audience cannot hear Victor Lam over the audience's own noise. 3 stage crew members move along the studio perimeter toward the stage, approaching from different angles, hands raised, speaking to Bull Kamo in urgent low voices, asking Bull Kamo to step back, step down, leave the stage. Bull Kamo does not acknowledge the crew members. Bull Kamo's full attention is on Bruce Lee across the studio stage. Bull Kamo's world has narrowed to one person in one place. The crew members stop at the stage edge, uncertain of the next step. Bruce Lee raises one hand, palm outward, directed at the approaching crew members. The gesture is calm and complete. Wait. Bruce Lee does not look at the crew members while making the gesture. Bruce Lee's eyes remain on Bull Kamo. The crew members stop. They stop immediately, responding to something in the gesture's quality that carries more authority than the stage manager's verbal instructions carried. The studio watches Bruce Lee's raised hand. The studio waits. Bull Kamo breathes across the stage. Storyboard 8, full reversal on camera. Bruce Lee and Bull Kamo face each other across the studio stage, the open space between them holding the weight of everything the last several minutes have contained. Bruce Lee's posture is the same posture Bruce Lee arrived on the stage with. Bull Kamo's posture has changed completely, heavier, lower, the confidence replaced by something that is trying to look like confidence and is not succeeding. The cameras record both men. The audience watches both men. The stage holds both men. Bull Kamo swings, a wide right arm, loaded with everything Bull Kamo has, thrown with the desperate commitment of someone who has run out of alternatives and is placing every remaining resource into one motion. The swing is enormous. The swing is fast for 400 pounds. The swing carries the full, genuine fury of a man who has been humiliated on live television in front of his city and needs this moment to correct everything. The swing finds nothing. Bruce Lee deflects Bull Kamo's arm, a clean outward redirection. Bruce Lee's forearm meeting Bull Kamo's forearm at the precise angle required to send Bull Kamo's strike offline without absorbing its force. The deflection is so clean and so economical that it looks accidental to the audience, as if Bruce Lee simply moved an arm and Bull Kamo's strike redirected itself. Bruce Lee's expression does not change during the deflection. The technique and the calm are one continuous thing. Bruce Lee's counter-strike arrives in the same breath as the deflection, a precise targeted blow to Bull Kamo's shoulder at the joint, delivered with the complete connected structure of Bruce Lee's body behind it. The strike is not designed to match Bull Kamo's power with equivalent power. The strike is designed to compromise Bull Kamo's structure at a specific point. Bull Kamo's right side collapses inward from the impact. Bull Kamo spins, the massive frame rotating from the shoulder hit. Bull Kamo drops to one knee on the studio stage floor, the knee landing with an impact the audience feels through the risers, the sound of 400 pounds finding a single point of contact with the stage floor. Bull Kamo's right hand goes to the shoulder where Bruce Lee's strike landed. Bull Kamo's left hand presses against the stage floor for support. Bull Kamo kneels on the stage of a live broadcast television program in front of the cameras and the audience and the city. Bull Kamo kneels. The studio audience roar begins in the front rows, the people closest to the stage, who saw everything at its clearest and fullest, and travels backward through the risers in a wave that gains volume with each row it passes through. By the time the roar reaches the back wall, it has become total, every voice in every seat contributing to the single sustained sound of hundreds of people, releasing the tension of the last several minutes all at once. Victor Lamb speaks into the microphone, but Victor Lamb's voice is different now. The professional broadcast smoothness is gone. What remains is something more honest, a voice that has witnessed something extraordinary and is trying to give the witnessed thing language and finding language insufficient. Victor Lamb's sentences are shorter than Victor Lamb's sentences are normally. Victor Lamb's voice breaks on one word. Victor Lamb does not try to hide that Victor Lamb's voice has broken. Victor Lamb keeps speaking. The television cameras move toward Bruce Lee, the operators pushing the wheeled cameras forward on their tracks, closing the distance to the stage, bringing Bruce Lee's standing figure into tighter frame. The red recording lights blaze steadily above each lens. Every camera in the studio is now directed at one person on one stage. Bruce Lee stands in the center of every frame simultaneously, composed, present, hands at sides, as the studio audience roar continues building around Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee stands over Bull Camo's kneeling position on the studio stage floor, not close, not looming, not performing the victory for the cameras or the audience. Bruce Lee stands at a respectful distance and looks at Bull Camo with an expression that contains no triumph, no contempt, no satisfaction. Bruce Lee looks at Bull Camo the way Bruce Lee has looked at everything tonight, completely, honestly, without the interference of ego in either direction. The cameras record this. The audience sees this. The city sees this. Storyboard 9, Villain Exposed. Bull Camo kneels on the studio stage floor with both hands pressing against the surface, the right hand still touching the shoulder where Bruce Lee's strike landed, the left hand flat on the floor for support. Bull Camo's breathing is audible from the front rows of the audience. Bull Camo's chest moves in hard, deliberate cycles. Bull Camo's shaved head is bowed. The stage floor that Bull Camo crossed with such confidence minutes ago now holds Bull Camo's weight in a completely different way. Bull Camo lifts the head slowly and looks up at Bruce Lee from the kneeling position. The face that looked down at Bruce Lee with contempt from a standing position now looks up at Bruce Lee from the floor. The sneer is gone. The theatrical grin is gone. The calculated performance of dominance is completely gone. What remains on Bull Camo's face is raw and honest and exposed, the face of someone whose entire self-definition has just been publicly and permanently dismantled. Bruce Lee extends one hand downward toward Bull Camo, open palm, offered without drama, without performance, without the particular flourish that would make the gesture into a statement about the offerer rather than a genuine offer to the recipient. Bruce Lee's extended hand is simply available. Bruce Lee's face holds no expression of superiority. The offer is as neutral and complete as everything else Bruce Lee has done on this stage tonight. The studio audience sees the offered hand. The audience goes quiet. Bull Camo looks at Bruce Lee's offered hand from the kneeling position, the long look of someone examining an unexpected thing carefully before responding to it. The studio holds its collective breath. The audience that erupted in roaring sound 20 seconds ago is now silent, the specific silence of people who sense that something more important than the fight is happening in this moment, and silence is the appropriate response to it. Bull Camo looks at Bruce Lee's hand. The pause is long. Bull Camo reaches up and takes Bruce Lee's offered hand. Bull Camo's enormous hand, the same hand that gripped Bruce Lee's throat minutes ago, closes around Bruce Lee's hand. Bruce Lee's grip firms. Bruce Lee pulls. Bull Camo rises slowly, weight shifting from the knee to the feet, the massive frame lifting from the floor with Bruce Lee's assistance. The studio audience begins making sound again, but different sound, quieter sound, the sound of something witnessed rather than something celebrated. The studio audience roar returns, but changed. The first roar was release and relief and disbelief. This roar is something more complex. Recognition, emotion, the specific overwhelming feeling of watching a moment that exceeds what it appeared to be on the surface. Several audience members are crying openly, not from distress, from the feeling that arrives when something happens that restores something one had quietly stopped believing in. The studio fills with this sound. The cameras capture the audience's faces. The faces are extraordinary. Victor Lamb stands at the desk edge with both hands pressed against the desk surface, and Victor Lamb is crying. Not dramatically, not performing grief for the broadcast, but the simple involuntary tears of someone who has witnessed something that bypassed every professional filter Victor Lamb possesses and landed directly. Victor Lamb reaches for the microphone. Victor Lamb opens Victor Lamb's mouth. Victor Lamb closes it again. Victor Lamb wipes one eye with the back of one hand. Victor Lamb tries again. The stage crew members who stopped at the stage edge at Bruce Lee's raised hand signal now exchange looks among themselves, the specific looks of people who are recalibrating something. Two crew members are not looking at each other. Two crew members are looking at Bruce Lee on the stage with the focused eyes of people filing something permanently into memory. The studio continues its extraordinary sound around them. The stage crew stands at the edge and witnesses. Bruce Lee releases Bull Camo's hand once Bull Camo is fully standing. Bruce Lee steps back one step, creating space, returning distance, restoring the dignity of distance to Bull Camo, who has just risen from the floor. Bruce Lee nods once, small, unhurried, addressed directly to Bull Camo and to no camera and to no audience. The nod is between two people only. Bull Camo receives it. Something passes between them that the cameras record but do not capture. Storyboard 10. Emotional Aftermath. Bruce Lee returns to the guest chair beside Victor Lamb's desk and sits. The same chair, the same position, the same composed stillness Bruce Lee brought to the chair before any of this began. The studio audience sound gradually reorganizes from roaring to murmuring as the audience processes what the last several minutes contained. Bruce Lee places both hands on both knees. Bruce Lee breathes once. The studio lights continue blazing overhead. The cameras continue recording. The program continues. Victor Lamb crosses from the desk to where Bruce Lee sits, abandoning the structured geography of the broadcast format entirely, closing the distance between host and guest with the informal directness of someone who has stopped thinking about broadcasting and is only thinking about the person in front of them. Victor Lamb stands before Bruce Lee and opens Victor Lamb's mouth. The words do not come immediately. Victor Lamb tries 3 times. The audience watches Victor Lamb try. The audience understands the trying. Bruce Lee looks at Victor Lamb and speaks first, quietly, a few sentences, unhurried. Bruce Lee does not summarize what happened on the stage tonight. Bruce Lee does not explain the techniques. Bruce Lee does not offer the audience a lesson or a narrative or a moral. Bruce Lee says something simple and private to Victor Lamb that makes Victor Lamb nod slowly and press both lips together and look at the studio floor for one long moment before looking back up. Through the studio audience risers, the emotional aftermath moves person by person, some wiping eyes openly without embarrassment, some sitting very still with expressions that are processing something internally that the face has not yet been given permission to show. An elderly man in the 4th row sits with both hands folded in his lap and tears running freely down his face. The elderly man does not wipe the tears. The elderly man simply lets them come. The camera finds this face briefly. On the far edge of the studio stage, Bull Camo sits alone on the stage steps, the enormous frame folded over, elbows on knees, head in hands. Bull Camo is not crying. Bull Camo is something beyond crying, the particular stillness of someone who has had a foundational belief about themselves removed in front of thousands of people, and is now sitting with the space that belief used to occupy. Bull Camo does not move for a long time. Bull Camo simply sits with the space. In the 2nd row of the studio audience, a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, dark hair, wearing the formal clothes his parents dressed him in for this evening, sits completely still amid the emotional studio chaos and stares at Bruce Lee across the studio floor with an expression of total, unfiltered wonder. The boy has not moved since Bull Camo's hands came off Bruce Lee's throat. The boy has been watching Bruce Lee without interruption since that moment. The boy will watch Bruce Lee for the rest of the boy's life. Bruce Lee notices the young boy in the 2nd row, the stillness of the boy's attention visible across the studio floor through the moving, emotional crowd. Bruce Lee meets the young boy's eyes. Bruce Lee holds the eye contact for one moment. Then Bruce Lee nods the same small, unhurried nod Bruce Lee gave Bull Kamo moments ago on the stage. Not performed, not theatrical, simply directed, person to person, across the studio floor to the boy in the second row. The young boy straightens in the second row seat. The specific straightening of someone who has received something they sense is important before they understand what it is. The boy's expression does not change, still the wide wonder, still the fixed attention on Bruce Lee. But something shifts in the boy's posture that will not unshift. Something settles into the boy's spine that was not there before Bruce Lee's nod arrived across the studio floor. The boy carries this home tonight. The boy carries this always. Bruce Lee rises from the guest chair as the broadcast segment concludes, shaking Victor Lamb's hand once more, the same warmth as the greeting, the evening's extraordinary content leaving no visible mark on Bruce Lee's manner. Bruce Lee walks from the stage into the studio wings, passing the cameras, passing the crew, passing the edge of the audience risers. Bruce Lee does not look back at the stage. The studio continues its sound behind Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee walks into the quiet of the wings. Bruce Lee disappears from the lights. The city keeps watching the screen where Bruce Lee was.